Adrian Peterson will go down as one of the best running backs of all time. The 7th overall pick in the 2007 draft has lived up to all the hype and finds himself alongside names like LaDainian Tomlinson, Emmitt Smith, Walter Payton, and more. In 15 seasons, AP put together a Hall of Fame career, finishing top 5 in all-time rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. He's also the last non-quarterback to win league MVP and the only to accomplish that since 2006. In that MVP season, Peterson rushed for over 2,000 yards, making him one of 8 players to ever accomplish that in a single season. Craziest part is, he did this a season after tearing his ACL in late December. Not only was the recovery time miraculous, but to win MVP just a year later is unheard of. But instead of going out on top, it was pretty much the opposite, as he bounced around the league and looked to recapture what he once had. We are going to start this story after the 2016 season, his final year in Minnesota. He left the Vikings as their all-time leading rusher by far and will always be a legend in that fan base. At that point, the past 3 years were a roller coaster for him. Between being suspended for 15 games for child abuse allegations in 2014, then bouncing back the following year to lead the league in rushing in 2015, and then in 2016 tearing his meniscus in a very disappointing final year with the Vikings. Minnesota had the option to keep him for $17 million in 2017, but at 32 years old and only playing in 3 games that year, the Vikings decided to move on and release him. He rushed for over 11,000 yards in his 10 years there, and it's even more impressive when you consider that he only played in 1 game during that 1 year he was suspended. The consensus belief was that Peterson still had a lot to offer, although he was 32 years old. In all fairness, he did lead the league in rushing just 2 years before that, so it was not just blind optimism. The rumors started about his next landing spot, and teams like Tampa, the Giants, Green Bay, Houston, and Dallas were all mentioned. Surprisingly, it was none of the above. Peterson signed with the New Orleans Saints for a 2-year, $7 million deal, which of course included incentives. It was an interesting move, joining a team that already had a good starting back in Mark Ingram. But Sean Payton assured them that they would coexist, and behind Drew Brees and a great offensive line, it was definitely intriguing. And just like it was scripted, the Saints played at the Vikings in week 1 of the 2017 season. But the honeymoon did not even last 2 quarters into the season, as a clip of Peterson giving head coach Sean Payton a death stare was all over social media. Peterson was only given 4 carries at halftime for 14 yards, and he was visibly frustrated with his role. AP denied in the media and on his own Twitter that he said anything negative to Sean Payton, but he did feel the team should have ran the ball more. The Saints started the 2017 season 0-2, and AP had a dreadful 14 carries for 44 yards in 2 games. 2 weeks later, Peterson was done in New Orleans. Mark Ingram looked great, and this 3rd-round rookie by the name of Alvin Kamara was apparently really good. AP denied requesting a trade, but at the same time, he did admit he wanted a change of scenery after seeing how the first 4 games played out. His Saints career did last 4 games, and he rushed for 81 yards on exactly 3 yards per carry. In the previous 2016 season, AP averaged a dreadful 1.9 yards per carry in 3 games before that meniscus injury, so questions did arise of whether he was washed and can even play anymore. AP shot that down, saying, "I look to play at least 4 to 5 more years, and God willing, I have a lot left in the tank." And maybe he was right. In his first game as an Arizona Cardinal 2 weeks later, AP ran for 134 yards and 2 touchdowns on 26 carries. So yeah, maybe Peterson was not washed. This was the year that David Johnson broke his wrist and missed most of the year, so the opportunity was there for playing time. He saw 27 carries in 4 games as a Saint and almost surpassed that in his first game with his new team. 2 games later, Peterson had 159 rushing yards on a career-high 37 carries, which is crazy because I definitely assumed that his career high in carries would be as a Viking. His Cardinals career only lasted 6 games as a neck injury forced him to miss the last 6 games of the year. He finished with 448 yards on 129 attempts and a couple of touchdowns. He had those 2 monster games, but in between that were a lot of very inefficient performances as well. Next offseason, he was released by Arizona, but scooped up on a 1-year minimum deal by the Redskins after they faced some preseason injuries in the backfield like Darius Geis. In his age 33 season, AP put up his final year of over 1,000 rushing yards, making him the oldest 1,000-yard rusher since John Riggins in 1984. He was able to stay healthy all year for the first time in 3 years, and although he clearly had lost a step, he was still an effective lead runner for Washington. During 2018, he passed Jim Brown, moving into the top 10 of all-time rushing yards, and had over 100 career touchdowns. Even on Monday Night Football, football against the Eagles, he had a career-long 90-yard rushing touchdown, which is another thing you would not expect to happen at 33 years old. He also placed third in Comeback Player of the Year voting, which of course he lost to Andrew Luck that year. In 2019, Peterson was re-signed for 2 years, $8 million with Washington at 34 years old. He didn't have that same aura as he did with the Vikings back in his prime, but he was still looked at as an above-average running back in the league. Unfortunately, it was reported around this time that AP had been dealing with debt and lost $100 million since entering the league, due to trusting the wrong people with his finances, according to his lawyer. It wasn't just father time that hampered late career Adrian Peterson, but sad stories like this kept on coming out about his financial situation and other stuff that we'll get to later. In week 1 of the 2019 season, he was a healthy and active, which raised some eyebrows due to his new contract and good production the year prior. There were rumors that Jay Gruden wanted to cut AP before the season, but it was overruled. Whether that was 100% true or not, I don't know. They tried rolling with Darius Geis as the main back, but he hurt his knee in week 1 and Peterson was made the starter the following week. In December of that season, he passed Curtis Martin, moving into top 5 all-time in rushing yards, and was still pretty decent overall on the field. He finished that year with 898 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns in 15 games. He was also rewarded with the Art Rooney Award in 2019, which recognized great sportsmanship and respect for others on the field. AP remained on Washington's roster throughout the summer in 2020, but was cut right before the regular season on September 4th. Just when you thought that might be it, he was signed 2 days later by the Detroit Lions on a cheap 1-year deal. He started 10 games, most of them came early in the season before rookie running back DeAndre Swift became familiar with the offense. He opened up the year with a 93-yard performance versus the Bears, but Peterson never had a single 100-yard game, which was a rarity during his illustrious career. He had to share the backfield with DeAndre Swift and Kerryon Johnson, but still managed 604 rushing yards on 156 carries. The season concluded and Peterson was a free agent. Now at 36 years old, it seemed unlikely that he'd ever be picked up by a team ever again. Peterson did not play in the first 8 weeks of 2021, and I think we all assumed it was over at that point with his numbers declining and lack of interest around the league. But then the leading rusher in the NFL at that time, Derrick Henry, went down with a foot injury, and Tennessee signed AP to a deal for the remainder of the season. Peterson scored a touchdown in his first game as a Titan on Sunday Night Football, but that was pretty much his lone bright spot. Overall, he lasted 3 games, totaling 82 yards on 27 carries, which is barely over 3 yards per carry. Less than a month later, he was waived, but picked up by the Seattle Seahawks practice squad a week later. Seattle had injuries, including Chris Carson's abrupt retirement, so the Hawks swooped in and used Peterson for 1 game. He had 11 carries for 16 yards, but he did find the end zone and was probably his last touchdown in the NFL. After that, they made him a healthy and active for the remaining 5 games and has yet to play in a game since. On the bright side, that rushing touchdown as a Seahawk made him the only player in NFL history to have a rushing touchdown on 6 different teams. He'll be 38 next month, and I just can't see a team actually needing his services at this point. During this past NFL season, AP took part in a different sport as he boxed against another former running back, Le'Veon Bell, and sadly, Peterson got knocked out in the final round. Although he wanted to play in the NFL in 2022, it never came to fruition. In a TMZ interview, Peterson suggested that there were a couple teams that had some interest, specifically mentioning the Bills, Rams, and 49ers, but as I said, it just never came to fruition. For arguably the best running back of this generation, I think we all hoped it would be a more gracious ending to his career. Since last playing, he has also gotten some legal trouble for domestic violence involving his wife on a plane. The plane was forced to return to the gate and Peterson was escorted off the plane. His wife did claim that there was no physical contact and it was only verbal, so eventually the charges were dropped. Up until 2014, it seemed like Peterson had a squeaky clean image. He gave back to the community very often, was a leader in the locker room, and remained a loyal Minnesota Viking. But then, of course, the child abuse situation shocked us all in 2014, and Peterson missed basically the entire season because of it. He never spent time in jail, but did serve a lot of community service time before being reinstated to the NFL in 2015. While disciplining children may be necessary at certain points, it seemed like Peterson took it way too far and caused some eye-opening injuries to his son based on pictures. Then, of course, there was a story about Peterson filing for bankruptcy. While some of it could be trusting the wrong people, he also has an estimated 6 to 8 children, mostly with different women. When you look up his current net worth, you get anything from about $1 to $5 million, which to the average person is pretty damn good. But for a guy who was well worth over $100 million at one time, time, it's quite the disappointing outcome. There hasn't been that much news about AP currently, but he did make an appearance at the Vikings playoff game in January. He met up with fans, took pictures, and signed autographs. He also made headlines around the Super Bowl after being very displeased with a jacket worn by Damar Hamlin, as Hamlin's jacket showed a crucifix on the back and Peterson took exception. Now that his playing career is most likely over and no, he's not retired yet, you just hope he finds his way out of this financial hole and can spend time with his kids and find another passion post his playing career. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Remember to leave a like and subscribe for more content, and I'll talk to you guys next time.